Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the Wyoming House of Representatives, 66th Wyoming Legislature. Thank you for joining us today. We're still missing a couple committees. They're still hard at work downstairs, and some of you are just returning too. So we're going to start with our prayer of the day, and we're so pleased to be joined by Father August. Please join Father August.
The theme is understanding from Wisdom 3:9. Those who trust in him will understand truth, and the faithful will abide with him in love because grace and mercy are upon his elect, and God watches over his holy ones. Lord, help us understand all your works. All of your creation is a sign of your mercy, and to see your image in every person. Help us to see that every person has purpose and meaning. Only sin and selfishness destroys your purpose, but your mercy and forgiveness restores that purpose. Lord, help us discern wisely the work we do in this chamber so that the people in Wyoming will be wisely served, and true justice and understanding will flourish in our beautiful state. Amen.
Thank you. Join in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Thank you very much, Father August, for your prayer. Trying to get a sense of the room. So I think we're just going to delay just the roll call just a little bit so we don't have to keep revisiting. So I know there's a privilege of the floor that was requested. So Representative Starvar, would you provide us that privilege as we wait for our colleagues?
Privilege of the floor, Mr. Speaker.
Please.
Thank you. I want to recognize the Kidd family. Please rise. Andrew and Sandra Kidd. Lizzie Kidd is the second female scout to earn the Covenant Eagle Scout Award in the state of Wyoming. Her project was No Veteran Left Behind. She found about 840 veterans with no markers and not recognized in the Lakeview Cemetery. Lizzie Kidd is also a University of Wyoming student majoring in veterinary medicine and zoology. Let's give her a hand.
Welcome to the House and congratulations on the good work you've done. And we look forward to your continued success in your studies. Veterinary medicine, that's a pretty good field. I'd stick with it. Stick with it. It might turn out. I think we're still missing a committee, aren't we? Well, is there any other privileges of the floor? Sorry, I'm not trying to stall for time, but we better go ahead and call the roll so we can actually do business of the body. Deputy Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Convening roll call for the 16th day, Tuesday, March 9th, 2021. Andrew. Baker. Banks. Bear. Blackburn. Brown. Burkhart. Burt. Clausen. Clifford. Connolly. Crago. Duncan. Eklund. Air. Flitner. Fortner. Gray. Greer. Hallinan. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Hunt. Jennings. Kinner.
Here.
Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson Dan. McGuire. Martinez. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Oakley. Obermueller. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Paxton. Provenza. Roscoe. Schwartz. Sherwood. Simpson. Summers. Stith. Stivar. Sweeney. Walters. Washit. Western. Wharf. Williams. Wilson. Winter. Yin. Zwanitzer. Speaker Barlow.
So members, we have one committee that's out, and so I think we'll leave the roll open a little bit longer. We'll finish up. We have some journal committee reports and a few things that we'll do before we get to third reading. And then we'll, hopefully they'll be back by then. Reading clerk, journal committee report.
Your journal committee reports that the journal of March 8th, 2021 has been read and recommends that it be approved. Representatives Provenza and Haroldson.
We have one message.
We'll take a message from the Senate.
Message 199. Mr. Speaker, upon reconsideration of the bill listed below, pass the Senate third reading by the vote indicated. Senate File 85, Property Tax Reporting and Exemption. Ayes 18, noes 12. Sincerely, Ellen Thompson, Senate Chief Clerk.
Reports from standing committees, none. So we're just going to stand at ease just for a moment, folks. And the reason is for the members in the body and the folks that may be listening in is we're going to third reading, which is of course our final vote on bills. And I certainly want to give the 9 members who are in that committee the opportunity to vote on those bills. So we'll just stand at ease for a few moments. I think they're starting to get here. So I think the chairman of the committee has returned, so we're going to assume that the rest of the committee is close behind. Let's go ahead and complete our roll.
Baker. Gray. Hallinan. Harshman. Henderson. Jennings. Roscoe. Schwartz. Sweeney. Ian. 60 present.
Thank you very much. Mr. Majority of the Floor Leader, did you have a message for the body?
Mr. Speaker, I move the consent list consisting of the following House bills: 33, 73, 101, 102, and 104.
Thank you, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. Would anyone like any of the bills on the consent list removed? Any of the bills removed from the consent list? Seeing none, will the reading clerk read the bills on the consent list?
House Bill 33, sponsored by Judiciary, interference with public contracting, an act relating to crimes and offenses being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. House Bill 73, sponsored by Representative Greer, birth certificates, gestational agreements, an act relating to vital records being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. House Bill 101, sponsored by Representative Summers, elk feed ground closings requirements, an act relating to elk feed grounds being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. House Bill 102, sponsored by Representative Barlow, Wyoming Preference Act of 1971 amendments, an act relating to Wyoming Preference Act of 1971 being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. House Bill 104, sponsored by Representative Greer, Uniform Trust Code amendments, an act relating to trusts being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall these bills pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Roll call on the consent list. Andrew. Baker. Banks. Bear. Blackburn. Brown. Burkhart. Burt. Clausen. Clifford. Connolly. Crago. Duncan. Eklund. Air. Flitner. Fortner. Gray. Greer. Hallinan. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Hunt. Jennings. Kenner.
Aye.
Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson Dan. McGuire. Martinez. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Oakley. Obermuller. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Paxton. Provenza. Roscoe. Schwartz. Sherwood. Simpson. Summers. Stith. Stivar. Sweeney. Walters. Washit. Western. Wharf. Williams. Wilson. Winter. Yin. Zawanitzer. Mr. Speaker, we have 60 aye. As for House Bill 33, are there any changes? Are there any changes? Closing vote. Vote is closed. 60 aye. As for House Bill 73, are there any changes? Haroldson, aye to no. Gray, aye to no. Washut, aye to no. Wilson, aye to no. Henderson, aye to no. Burkhart, aye to no. Worf, aye to no. Williams, aye to no. Flitner, aye to no. Knapp, aye to no. Yin, aye to no. Larson Dan, aye to no. Bear, aye to no. Fortner, aye to no. Baker, aye to no. Jennings, aye to no. Stibar, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 43 aye, 17 no. As for House Bill 101, are there any changes? Are there any? Zwanitzer, aye to no. Further change, Banks, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 58 aye, 2 no. As for House Bill 102, are there any changes? Gray, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. Fortner, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 58 aye, 2 no. And as for House Bill 104, are there any changes? Are there any changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 60 aye.
Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Bill 33, 73, 101, 102, and 104 have passed the House. We're now in that order of business of regular risks, third reading and final passage. The first bill for our consideration is House Bill 121.
House Bill 121, sponsored by Appropriations, State-Funded Capital Construction, an act relating to state-funded capital construction being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
We do have amendments. The first amendment, Representative Walters. He's standing at the copy machine out here getting his materials, I think. Representative Walters, you have third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 121. We're at that order of business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I'd like to move third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 121 and ask for your favorable consideration. And members, what this does is it goes into the tables on line 4 and it changes, or page 4, line 22, excuse me, and it changes the source of funding for the project at the good school where the springs flow from the rocks. And the reason we're changing the funding from SIPA to LSRA in this instance is SIPA has been oversubscribed for this year. This is a project that needs to take place. It's the issues that are being addressed with the construction that's going to take place there are really what I would describe as life safety. We have electrical issues, plumbing issues that are long overdue, and this is working on that. And so we need to make sure it happens. And so we're changing the funding source from SIPA over to LSRA. That's the first half of the amendment. The second part of the amendment in section 8 is where we create a subcommittee for review of what takes place here in this fine building. And that is spelled out there. It'll be 3 members appointed by the chief executive, as well as 3 members coming from the legislature as a whole, both our colleagues and our colleagues down the hall. And then it discusses what some of those duties will be for that subcommittee. And so with that, I would ask for your favorable consideration.
Any discussion on the amendment? Discussion on the amendment. First time. No discussion on the amendment. We are voting on third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 121. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment is adopted. We have a second amendment. Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move third reading amendment number 2 to House Bill 121, and we'll withdraw it at the proper time. And I think this bill is often a dividing line for individuals, and I'm just really going to urge a strong no vote. That's why I'm bringing the enacting clause amendment. Our state cannot afford this anymore. And the $4.5 million for continued capital renovation after, and that list I provided last week, where every single year I've been here, it has been presented that this is the last tranche to finish the building. I actually forgot one other tranche, which was the amount in the legislative feed bill to do the furniture additions last year that passed a week before coronavirus for the consultant on the furniture. And that was positioned as this is to finish the building. This is all we need to do. So there's actually a fifth example on the four that there's probably a few others I'm forgetting. But that's $4.5 million in this bill. And then you also have the $12 million disbursement of SIPA for the matching funds for the UW College of Law in this bill as well. So you add that together, that's $16.5 million. And you're going to look tomorrow at these, 18 amendments that have been proposed for the budget for the Department of Health reductions. These are very difficult reductions of about $15 million. And we need to think about every dollar spent, where it's going. Money is fungible. And I'd pose to you that I would rather have that Department of Health funding than these tranches for these new buildings. I just don't think our state can afford it. I think at some point we need to just accept that the building is completed. I don't think this is ever going to end. It's becoming a little bit odd, to be honest with you, the number of times we have heard that they need one more tranche to finish this building. It's getting odd. And so I'd urge a no vote on the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member for their first time? First time, Vice Chairman Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd encourage an aye vote on the CapCon bill. But I agree with the good presenter of this amendment that it's never going to end. Of course it won't end. That's part of the legislative responsibility that we have as we look at the capital construction needs of the state, that the state funds. We're the appropriators and we fund them. So there will always be a request that comes forward to fund some capital construction. We have that debate. We go through it. I believe in respect to the comments about funding at the community college and the University of Wyoming, the capital college funding is about 95% of what we typically see. But for the University of Wyoming, it's like 40% or less than what we would typically see for the University of Wyoming. So a significant reduction in those costs. I would also tell you that your community colleges, and I know that when we talk about capital construction, we're talking about all state type funded institutions. And I understand that, but this is a process that we use. And so in your communities, you have community colleges that are waiting on projects to be approved and to be funded in just about every quadrant of the state. Then we look at some of the health facilities that are under construction that we've committed to, the veterans home that we're committed to with some federal funds and state funds. And we've got to complete studies. So we have that $11 million contingency in there for the State Building Commission to make sure that we get those done. That's all funded through the Department of Construction, but that's just to make sure that we've got funds there available to carry out these projects that these community colleges and other institutions have moving forward. We have, we talk about, and I'll rehearse this a little bit, and I apologize for you old legislators, but for the new legislators, down at the bottom of the bill, you'll see $4 million to WLRC. When we started on that project, I was explaining it to my good colleague here that's new. When we started on that project, we're cutting along there and we've done all the abatement and mitigation for hazardous materials on the building. And then we start moving dirt. And in the dirt, we find these little, the industrial hygienists find these parcels of that old ceramic siding that that are gray haired like I am used to see on houses. It's called transite. And on the transite siding is really a concrete based siding that's held together with asbestos. We've all seen it. Well, as they were getting ready to demo some of these buildings and starting to take the material out, the ground is littered with this stuff. The hygienist said, well, you can't foul, you can't deal with this. And so you've got all of this ground is contaminated. And we hauled off thousands of yards of dirt that had transite into it, over $8 million. And what we said is, as legislative oversight, is this is in addition to the budget of the bill, but I don't want to estimate. I want to know what the actual costs are, and we'll come back each year and say, these are our known costs. We've done that in two different years. Our last year, we come back and says, our known cost to finish that up was a little over $4 million. The crest is the $4 million that you see. Those are actual costs are paid. Now, just to finish the story, the transite was actually incorporated when they built a section of that campus in the 30s, and they brought in a bunch of fill dirt. The fill dirt was from another construction site that was littered with that transite. Hasn't hurt anybody, but as we've moved forward as a society and in regulations, we just said that they required that to be moved. So we spent $8 million hauling dirt off. It's frustrating, but there it is. And so we've got in the Capcom bill, we've got that and these other expenses that we're obligated, we need to get taken care of. And so to just say no to this Capcom bill puts us in a predicament that we really shouldn't be in. And so I'd encourage a vote for the bill and just tell you that every year that you're here, we're going to have a Capcom bill. It used to be in the budget. We'll have a Capcom bill. These are the discussions that we need to have because we have a lot of buildings and around the state, and we fund this stuff, and we need to have these discussions. Thank you. On and for the bill.
Thank you. Chairman Nicholas, first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, on and against the amendment, and a couple different things I just want to bring out. But first of all, just look at this building we're in. And when you walk into it, it is truly amazing. And to be part of this for the last 6 years where we went through this process and what we came out with, it's just stunning. And it's breathtaking. And it'll stick with me for the rest of my life, what we did for this legislature and for the next 100 years. And for the people of Wyoming. And it's just a remarkable thing. It was expensive, no doubt. But I think you have to remember that we started saving to do this 10 years before we even went out for bid. We had $140 million in the bank waiting to do this project because we knew it was going to be expensive and time consuming. And it was going to be a burden on the legislature and the legislative process while we were out of this building. I think most of us are really, really proud of what we've got. The point is, it's not finished, and we need to finish it. And the good news is we have a SIPA account that is there in order to finish these one-time projects. That's what it's there for. And I can understand the issue of cost overruns on construction, and the amount of when you do commercial high-grade construction like this, it is not cheap. And we took testimony yesterday for the RIS system, and now they're forecasting that RIS system, just the computer system for transportation, is an $80 million project now. And the numbers are mind-boggling, and we struggle with them every day. And in appropriations, trust me, that's all we do is try to cut budgets and save money and try to control costs. But I mean, the argument that perhaps we don't need to spend another 4 million on this building is kind of throwing the bathwater out with the baby, or baby with the bathwater. And but I want you to think about what capital construction does for the state of Wyoming. It's really important. Typically, at least 1/3 of all the construction in the state of Wyoming is state dollars. What that means is, and last year we didn't have a CapCon bill, so we got behind on basically fueling, paying for our contractors and people in Wyoming to come out and to do the job, keep them employed, keep food on their table, and keep, and keep Wyoming moving forward. So in the 1980s and 1990s, we went through some very desperate times, the state of Wyoming did, and there was not a lot of money in the bank. So what did they do? They stopped doing major maintenance and almost no capital construction. So what happened as a result of that? In the early 2000s, all of our schools were severely behind in major maintenance. Some of them were falling apart, and we had to come back. Fortunately, we had the boom, and so we were able to spend billions of dollars bringing our schools back up to snuff, start building new schools again, and start rebuilding and refinishing a lot of our office buildings, our state office buildings. But for the boom, that would have never happened. But the problem was we didn't keep up. If you don't keep up with your major maintenance and with new construction and replacing buildings when they're out of date, you get behind, and then it gets more and more expensive to fix. Thus, the creation of SIPA. SIPA is for strategic one-time construction projects to keep us in the flow so we don't get behind on our major maintenance, or if we do, we replace buildings when we need those buildings. And let's think about it from another standpoint. What brings people to Wyoming? How do we grow this state? What's the magic mix? We spend 26 million on in the tourism department. I would represent to you that what probably a more by far a greater incentive to keep people here and to bring people here are the quality of our schools, what we pay teachers, the quality of our buildings, and the quality of the government that we offer. It's a wonderful place to live. And if we don't continue major maintenance, and if we don't continue taking care of our buildings and building new buildings and staying in the modern age, I would submit that's a heck of a lot more important than $26 million in tourism. That's what keeps Wyoming alive and keeps us going. And it's incredibly important that we kind of separate these one-time projects and our ongoing operations of government. We just need to do it. And that's what keeps us here, keeps our children here and their children here. We just got to keep this as a great state. So, and then on top of that, we didn't do any capital construction last year. So basically we lost about $60 to $50 million, $50 million to $100 million in new projects. And so basically on the capital construction side, we've already taken the economic hit by not spending. And now we're kind of getting back in the groove as we slowly kind of climb out of this COVID and low dollar environment. So on and against, appreciate your consideration and on and against the bill.
Thank you. Chairman Flitner, first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For me, this is about Wyoming jobs. And also, there's nothing I hate worse than a gate that doesn't swing. And if you've ever been on a ranch and lived through difficult times, you realize a gate hung up with baling twine is very frustrating and it's inefficient. And I think too about my good community college up in my part of the world. They've got a student center that honestly, if it was a K-12 building, it would have been condemned. We didn't get to work on that building a year ago, and it's really vitally important to that community college. I urge your support of this bill because more than anything, it's jobs. These are Wyoming workers who will be put to work with these projects. And just like that gate that doesn't swing, if you continue to let it not get fixed, then that gate becomes another gate and another gate. And over the course of time, then those projects increase and it costs only more money in the end, a generation later when you have to try to make those corrections. If you can stay on top of these jobs as they come, it's less of a deal. So I just would urge a no on the amendment and aye on the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Harshman, first
Thank you,
time.
Mr. Speaker. Members, if you take out your bill, just so you're clear on what you're voting on, I think if you look at the last page, the fiscal page, 16 million, 17 million in federal funds, that's for an armory in Sheridan. Okay, and then 94 million in private funds, that's various community colleges. That's those local funds. 5 million special revenue, that's state parks. I think it's Hot Springs State Park has got a big project going, and then there's a couple little smaller projects, and these are all visitor revenues that come to the park. 31 million in strategic investments project account. So the big difference, I think, talking about this capital between us and the 1886 folks who laid the cornerstone, had 5,000 people out front celebrating as they borrowed the money to do it. They used all out-of-state workers. So we're going to pay cash. We don't owe anybody a dime. We pay cash. We got a system set up because it never ends. State's going to keep growing and moving forward, and things never last forever. And why we were the guys who had to do this capital, I don't think John Fike and Sons, who built this place back in 1886, 87, figured, hey, that's 64th, 5th, and 6th legislature. We're going to make darn sure they redo this place. Just happened. We happened to be born and elected, and we're here, and we had to make a decision. It'd be another 100 years, somebody else, maybe the 120th, will have to redo this place again. It's ongoing. Hey, let's talk about the Department of Health cuts. Well, first of all, you saw in the presentation yesterday from May Craig, when oil was negative 30, right? The asset became a liability. It's not that way today. We know Craig has changed, and it's going to continue to change through next October. I don't think any of us are leaving here with those phase 3 cuts in place. And what I raised my right hand for a month ago, to grow the LSRA by 200 million and throw the elderly out of their homes. Not happening. I don't think any of us are going to vote for that. So I don't think this is a choice this is not a choice between construction workers all around the state and the elderly or our school children. It's not. So again, we pay hard cash. We don't owe anybody any money, and we're going to keep building the state. That's what we do. So against this amendment and for the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Representative Ottman, first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As somebody that grew up in rural America and also had a father that was very involved with construction, I understand how things can be over budget. I understand how things can fall apart. But I also understand that there needs to be a bit of accountability in the bidding process. And that's where my concern is and why this amendment may be where the direction I head. But what I want to say is with a few of the projects that have gone on, we being a citizen legislature can vote for things that we want, but where's the accountability? Who's going to make sure that those soils are good for that building? Who's going to make sure of the drainage problems in the basement? Who's going to make sure that the windows aren't popping out? Who's going to do those things, and how do we manage those things? So that's where my concern is when going into remodeling of buildings that are in disrepair because we can get them, and where things might go with that. So thank you.
Thank you. Majority Floor Leader Summers.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. On and support of the bill, and to the last speaker's questions. You know, part of what we do in CapCon right now is we kind of try to bunch those costs for what you would call phase 1 or phase 2 studies, your architectural studies, so we can get a good bid. So we've started to learn how to bunch those together to get better bids. And now on many of our projects, we're doing, you know, construction managers at risk and making sure we have, and it's in this budget, to make sure we have that position on these state projects. And the state is going to continue to need buildings. This is just a fact. I mean, every building on every place, if you're a rancher, you got them that go back 100 years or brand new and they degrade and you have to replace them. It's just all a part of the system. And so I think we're getting better on our bidding. I think we're getting better on our construction oversight. And I think this is important for jobs in Wyoming. On in support of the bill.
Thank you. Representative Washut, your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Speaker, you know, there are some things in this bill I wish weren't in the bill, but there's an awful lot of things that are funded with special revenues and other sources. And that's what those special revenue accounts are for, to fund those types of projects. And when this morning, when I looked at my wrinkled face in the mirror, I said, you know, where were you on second reading, Washut? Did you bring an amendment to take out any of these things that you thought were problematic? And I did not. So why would I vote no on the bill today when I had the chance to bring an amendment to take out an item that I thought didn't need to be there? And I didn't do it. So my thought is if we didn't address concerns on second reading, we ought to vote for the bill today because there's so many good things that are being funded with this account. And so I'm an aye vote.
Thank you. Any other member for their first time? Members for their first time? Members for their second time? Members for their second time before the sponsor, second time to the sponsor, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Appreciate the debate. So we've heard a number of arguments. One is that, well, there's some good stuff in this bill, and therefore the premise is that it should be accepted because there's some good things here. So what's the line? Nobody ever draws the line. Nobody ever answered the question on the $16.5 million projects and justifying those. Is there ever a line? If there's one good thing in this bill, like some Washington omnibus bill that just gets stacked with a bunch of bad things because there's one must pass thing in there, are we ever going to say no? Nope, no one answered that. The whole notion, I mean, that this body is accepted 5 times on my count over once a year since I've been here, this notion that this building isn't completed and there needs to be another tranche to complete it. And every time it's the same argument. It's like an out-of-body experience listening to it every time. It really is, because I feel like it's just repeated over and over and over again. And it's becoming a little bit odd. And at some point, I think we need to move forward and accept that the project is completed. The other thing I'd note is note how in that 20 minutes off, probably the 2.5 minutes that, I introduced the enacting clause, not one person talked about the 2 projects specifically. The $4.5 million tranche on the Capitol and the $12 million tranche on the UW College of Law, and on first reading, to respond to the point from the representative from House District 36, my seatmate, on first reading, we did try to take this out. Second reading is second reading, but first reading, we tried to take it out and it failed by a couple votes. So this is our option at this point. And even on that, the debate there was fascinating to me because, at one point someone was trying to suggest that maybe it wasn't respectful to move forward with this at the Capitol, saying that, well, this bill has a lot of good things in it. At no point does anyone talk about the issue, the project, the $4.5 million tranche. Why is that needed? Or $12 million for the UW College of Law when they can raise the money for that building? And I would humbly suggest to you that there's a reason why that's not being talked about, because there isn't an answer, or at least not a good one. This bill is profligate, unsustainable. It needs to stop. Whether it's a $300 million deficit in education or a $700 million one, based on the capital gains, money's fungible. And every dollar spent is another dollar that we're not able to plug a deficit or to fill in needed services. And we do not need these projects, or at least those 2. And it's not good enough for our constituents to say, well, there's other good things in it. So the bill must pass. And this is a choice. It always is. Every vote's a choice. So I urge a no vote on this bill. Thank you for your time. Respectfully withdraw third reading amendment number 2 to House Bill 121. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Gray. House Bill 121, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Andrew. Baker. Banks. Bear. Blackburn. Brown. Burkhart. Burt. Clausen. Clifford. Connolly. Crago. Duncan. Eklund. Air. Flitner. Fortner. Gray. Greer. Hallinan. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Hunt. Jennings. Kenner.
Aye.
Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson Dan. McGuire. Martinez. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Oakley. Obermuller. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Paxton. Provenza. Roscoe. Schwartz. Sherwood. Simpson. Summers. Stith. Stivar. Sweeney. Walters. Washit. Western. Wharf. Williams. Wilson. Winter. Yin. Zawanitzer. Mr. Speaker. Closing vote. Are there any changes? Closing vote. Vote is closed. 41 aye, 19 no.
House Bill 121, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Bill 121 has passed the House. Next bill for our consideration is House Bill 133.
House Bill 133, sponsored by Representative Walters. Online sports wagering, an act relating to online sports being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
So we do have amendments, and actually a 5th amendment just appeared. The first amendment is a delete the enacting clause, so we'll begin with number 2. So the third reading amendment number 2, Representative Clifford.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move third reading amendment number 2 to House Bill 133, and I would ask for your favorable consideration. Colleagues, when gaming came to my people on the Wind River Indian Reservation, my mother was against it wholeheartedly. Then I went to college. There was a debate going on. And as I was going through college, I never knew what I wanted to be when I grew up. I never did. All my degrees are very general degrees. And then I was hired after graduating from the university across the hill, over the hill here. In 2005, I got my start at our casino enterprises. And I worked in payroll department for 6 months running payroll. And after that, I was promoted to the human resource director, where I found my passion, and I worked in that role for 7 years. 7 years. I was overtraining. I dealt with conflict. Just a lot of things. And what I saw over those years was people trying to really work hard and trying to improve their lives. And when I started at the casino, it's highly regulated. We had to go through an intense background. And we got a license to work. And at that time, it was also a license, if you were employed, not to gamble. We weren't allowed to gamble at first. But after the forces that be presented to the tribal council that they wanted to be able to gamble. And what I saw sitting in that human resource chair, after a while, after months, then years, I sat there for 7 years, I saw people struggling with problem gambling. I saw them gambling their whole paychecks away. I saw them losing their cars. I saw them losing their houses. That's what I saw. And sitting there at HR, having all the data before me and working with these employees, that's what encouraged us there to have this wellness program. And what this current amendment does is increase the second reading amendment from the good representative from House District 20. So it's increasing it because there are going to be struggles. I've seen it and heard it firsthand. And so I would just ask for your favorable consideration to increase this so we can address the struggles that gambling brings to our people here in our great state. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other member for their first time? Second reading amendment, or third reading amendment number 2? Any member for their first time, second time? Members, we are voting on third reading amendment number 2, House Bill 133. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment is adopted. Next amendment for considerations, third reading and amendment number 3, Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I bring you third reading amendment number 3 to House Bill 133 and ask for your favorable consideration. And so what's going on here, members, is really this entire amendment is technical in nature, and it's technical in nature due to the fact that there was some changes that took place on the internet as the amendment we passed on Friday came out. And so there was an original amendment that came out. And then as I explained the bill on Friday, I discussed the fact that there was some language missing from it that would have included our friends from friends from the both tribes of the Wind River Reservation. And that language was left out. But at some point during our debate, or possibly at the end of the day, that corrected copy was then posted, and that showed that we had adopted the corrected copy. But I don't think the corrected copy is what most of you had seen. And so what this amendment does is it deletes what I think we saw on Friday, what we may have seen on Friday, and then just ask us to adopt what's before us and what would have been before us in advance of the discussion on Friday. So as I said, it really allows us to match the journal with the action that was taken on Friday. So it's technical in nature. I'd ask for your favorable consideration.
Any member for their first time, third reading amendment number 3? Any member for their first time? First time, seeing none. We are voting on third reading amendment number 3, House Bill 133. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment is adopted. We have another amendment, third reading amendment number 4, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I respectfully withdraw third reading amendment number 4 to House Bill, whichever one we're on.
133. Thank you, Representative Gray. The next amendment for our consideration is third reading amendment number 5, Chairman Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, move third reading amendment number 5 to House Bill 133. Members, just moves any revenue from this school foundation program, trying to solve some of our deficit. It's $1 million. It's like 13 kindergarten teachers. It's $2 million, double that, whatever this revenue is going to be. So I think thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Chairman Harshman. Any Any discussion on the amendment? Discussion on amendment? Chairman Zwanitzer, first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Against the amendment, not because I think it's necessarily a bad idea, but I think for the time we implement the program, the money goes to the general fund, and at some point in the future, that would be the appropriate time to decide, based on the revenues and what our revenue picture looks like at that time, where we start diverting money. I've just had we talked about deja vu earlier, too many of these things where we're dedicating the money to education right up front before we know exactly what's going to be there and how much it's going to be. And I would say part of the reason we're in where we are right now is because we've done this too much traditionally, historically. For now, I think it's better just put the money in the general fund. We can certainly keep tabs on how much it is and send it where it needs to go in maybe the budget session, which would probably be a more appropriate time to start diverting large amounts of revenue places.
Thank you. Chairman Greer, first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Not to pile on too much, but I too oppose the amendment. Let's get this stood up. Let's get the funding in place for the counseling, to see what the revenue stream is, see what we've got before we dedicate an unknown revenue stream. Just take a look at the big picture.
Thank you. Representative Gray, first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wholeheartedly support this amendment. It's very difficult to divert a flow once it is established. And I'm just very perplexed about all these bills that create new streams. You know, whether or not I'm opposed for or against the concept, that's a different issue. But then you look at the flow and all of them go into the general fund, which isn't the issue. And it's just very perplexing because everyone says they want to solve the deficit. And there's a certain approach towards that. And then the stream doesn't fall into that account, which I think is just really odd. And I think this is the fiscally conservative approach. You know, it's $50 million a year. And I support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other, Chairman Wilson?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and against the amendment. I wasn't going to talk. But really, guys.
Thank you, Chairman Wilson. Next.
But I am. If we're going to solve the school funding problem, if we're going to tell children this is a valuable service and we are willing to tax ourselves or do whatever, let's have it be something where I can't say anything that people are going to wag their fingers at me later on, but really, there's other states where we have gambling for tots, marijuana for tots. I can think of some other topics, you know, things that are services that are available in other states. Please, let's just, I'm going to vote against the bill anyway, but if we're going to take this money, at least put it in the general fund and then we can appropriate it and say, okay, this is the money we ought to move. But let's just not tell the kids that we care so little about your schools that we're just willing to everybody do things that nobody likes so that we can give you a classroom. Please just vote no on the amendment.
Any other tots would like to testify for their first time? Madam Minority Floor Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And boy, the last speaker with the pot for tots, it's like, why not? And this is gambling for tots. I can't figure out the good catchphrase for it. But in all honesty, we have had directed revenue that has gone towards the school foundation account and the school capital construction account. We no longer have those directed revenues. We have been looking for ways to direct those revenues to those pots. It has been our number one or number two priority for the past couple of years. This is one method, one means to do it, is to fill those pots. So I would encourage us to vote yes on this. This is one way that we keep our general fund intact and that we start addressing the school foundation finance problem. On and in favor.
Thank you. Any other member for their first time? First time on the amendment, first time, seeing none. Any member for their second time? Second time, Chairman Zwanitzer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't want to be said in this body that we have not been addressing it for 8 years. And I didn't see this amendment early enough today, but some of you will remember, I think it was 4 years ago, I got up in front of the room and I went through all 14 different accounts somewhere in state statute that all diverted a portion of money to education. I mean, that is how I would have to go and get the exact numbers of how much of that is pouring into above and beyond, the trust lands. But it's a significant portion of education funding is coming from multitudes of different pots. And I know the philosophy from historically has been that's good, right? Money should go to education. And I think we all appreciate that. But someday when we're trying to figure out how we unwind funding from education and start budgeting a little more, I would say, even more transparent and more accountable than we are, right? Because I keep hearing that's the push out there is we want to be transparent and we want to be accountable. And I know the information's out there, but the average member of the public, it's really tough to look at how do we have an education funding problem? Well, here's some money for education. And then if memory serves, and I think they're all still in place, we have up to 14 different other pots of money that we're diverting funding from to go to education. But at some point, we are going to have to unwind that, I hope. I don't think this is a 100-year plan that a little bit from everything goes to education. So this is just one more of those things. Once you put it in statute, trying to take it out is going to be much more difficult. And I understand we have an education deficit, but instead of just feeding it and feeding it and feeding it, you need to make sure here's a pot of money that we all understand what's the pot of money. Here's the basket of goods and what it costs. And that's what I think makes it more transparent and accountable to the voters and the people of the state. And having just another fund of, well, now gambling is going to education too, which when we did this state lottery, right? We had a big fight of, should it go to cities and towns or should it go to education? And then we ultimately, through conference, got the first, 6 million at the time was cities and towns. And then the rest would go to education. And it was another one of anything excess, anything overflow always goes to education. And I know that's been the policy for many years that I spoke about in this room, but I'm starting to think that maybe I'm accumulating more people to my side on this argument over time.
Thank you, Representative Gray, for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd urge and I vote on the amendment. Responding to a couple of those points, I mean, this isn't feeding anything. It's a $700 million deficit, okay? Maybe we take the midpoint. There's a controversy, 300 to 700. Okay, let's take the 500. I mean, this is 1/10 of the deficit. We're going to get into a moment conceptually whether we're for and against the bill, and I want to vote no, but that's a different issue. This is if it passes, where it goes. And are we going to address if it passes 1/10 of the education finance deficit? And I would just say to not do that is an odd decision. And, this whole argument we've gotten more and more about transparency. I'm all for transparency, but because of the model, you have to have a separate account. So you have the general fund for ordinary operations of government. You have school foundation program for the schools, and you can even fold in CapCon probably into that. And then you have the backfill account, the cash backfill account, which is LISRA. So you have 3 accounts. And this is consistent with that. Now, because I'm all for getting rid of SIPA, which is a different topic, but you do need to have 3 accounts, and otherwise it just doesn't work. And so I would say put it in the school foundation program account. We'll have the conceptual debate in a moment, but I think the distribution should be there to solve 1/10 of the issue if it does pass. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member for their second time? Chairman Greer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, we all know the importance of education. We all know the structural deficit that exists there. And so a comment was made that, once you get these funding streams, they're hard to move. I disagree. It was just a few years ago that we took our spending policy amount and rearranged it so that we could solve the issue with school major maintenance. We looked at what we had. We had a problem. We had a revenue source. We knew we had to divert that revenue source to deal with that problem. We did it. Something we walked out of here with that year that was very good. My concern on this is just as what has been expressed is if we just keep putting those revenue streams in there without knowing what they are, without understanding the implications of what this legislation might do, that we're jumping the gun. It may be the case that this revenue stream is better directed towards mental health and substance abuse. It may be more closely tied to that. And that's a funding issue that we're facing this year, or we're going to face into the future. It was only, and my years all blur together, I'm sorry, but it wasn't very long ago, we had the Tobacco Trust Fund. Funds were going everywhere and nothing even remotely related to that. And we took the effort and brought that together and got those revenues off of that fund to be more focused on where those funds are coming in and why those funds came to the state of Wyoming. That's all I'm saying on this. It's a great idea to look at in the future for a revenue source. Let's get it stood up. Let's look at it. Let's just don't automatically push this into that fund. So, any comments? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm against the amendment.
Thank you. Any other member for their second time before the sponsor, to the sponsor, Chairman Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Really appreciate the debate. I will just tell you, wherever you direct this today, it will stay there. Don't kid yourself. I mean, go ahead and try to do under the cap severance tax. Take 40 million from YDOT. Good luck to you. Take a little money from Water One. Good luck to you. Severance, any severance tax, a lot of that's derived off school trust lands. None of it goes to schools. So what we set up is a structure. We have a structural deficit. This is a little bit, but whatever you send, it's like auto taxes. So there's not 13 flows going to schools. There's a couple, and that's part of the problem. It's all property taxes. And guess who pays the property taxes? It's mineral companies. And then it's FMRs. And so that's why you have the most mineral dependent government service in Wyoming is K-12 education. That's why we got this bill to try to do a little sales tax to spread that out, the ups and downs. It's a little thing, but I think it's really important for us to think about. You put this in the general fund, it will never come out of the general fund. That little deal that the good Speaker Pro Tem talked about a couple of years ago, investment flows in the per mill trust fund, we took 0.45% of the SIPA, happened at 1 o'clock in the morning in the old Jonas Center on a reconsideration vote. It died. I think it was Providence. I was down there and heard it on the speaker. Asked for a senator to come out. Please, please push for reconsideration. And we worked the body and they reconsidered it. It's 1 in the morning. Just never happens. That was an act of God, telling you. So I'm just, anyway, and this is a little bit of money. It's not going to matter one way or the other. The bigger issue is whether we want it or not. But if we're going to do some of these things, I think you try to solve some problems. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Members, we're voting on third reading, amendment number 5 to House Bill 133. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment has failed. Division being called. All those in favor of the amendment, please rise. All those opposed? Thank you for getting your exercise. The amendment has failed. All right, we are on the final amendment. I'm going to actually refresh my page. We don't have another one, do we, Chief Clerk? Okay, we are on the final amendment to the House Bill 133. Representative Simpson, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 133, and I will withdraw it at the appropriate time. Members, I feel like this is an important enough subject that we need to spend a little bit more time on debating. Before I became a legislator, I felt like for every brand new law that is put on the books, we should always take away a law. But now I'm here, I'm a legislator, I realized that was a fantasy land idea. That is never going to happen. And the reason is because our world is continually changing. We're adjusting. Our world is becoming more and more complicated. But I do still ask the question each time a bill is presented, is this bill really necessary? So I ask that question of you today. Why is this bill important enough that we would make it law? It's been suggested that people are already doing it. They're illegally doing it, and we ought to just make it a law so that it can be legalized. That doesn't hold water to me. The next one is it generates revenue for the state. Well, today we're sending $300,000 to help with addiction recovery counselors to help solve the problems. Unfortunately, the people they're going to help have already ruined their lives. There's a little bit left there. That amendment just failed. I would have loved to run another amendment, gambling for tots, but since that one didn't work out, we'll let it go. So really what I've come down to is, why are we considering this bill? And in my opinion, it's all about allowing people to have fun, allowing people to freedom to do whatever they want to. My dad taught me literally as a philosophy when we were growing up to work hard and to play hard. My wife sometimes suggests that I take the second half a little too literally. I have snowmobiles, four-wheelers. I like going to sporting events. I enjoy life. But I would submit to you that all the fun activities that I do not hurt other people. This particular fun activity has the potential of destroying a lot of lives. Addictions are real, and they will happen in our society if we pass this bill. Betting on sporting events is not an activity that does not have consequences to others. It will damage lives and damage families. I encourage a no vote on the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative Simpson, for your first time. Representative Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd encourage a no vote on this bill. And we don't normally have props here, but we are allowed to use the Constitution. And so I would just direct you to Article 7. It's kind of interesting. The topic of the heading on it is education, state institutions, promotion of health and morals. That's kind of an interesting thing. Then in section 20, we all took an oath to this. We took an oath to those people out there that we came down here to represent. And so section 20 says the duty of the legislature to protect and promote health and morality of people. As the health and morality of the people are essential to their well-being and to the peace and permanence of the state, it shall be the duty of the legislature to protect and promote these vital interests by such measures for the encouragement of temperance and virtue, and such restrictions upon vice and immorality of every sort as are deemed necessary to the public welfare. I think sometimes, sure, we're looking for money. I get that. But sometimes there's a larger price that might be paid by our citizens, those people back home. Maybe they're on the verge already. And this is a vice. This is an issue. I'm not going to tell anyone what they should do with their conscience on this. But I think you have to look at that. We swore an oath to this. I, for one, take that oath very seriously. Doesn't mean that I'm going to agree with everybody in this room. But there are times where I think it's very important that we step back and we look at this. And I think this is one of those times. We ask our military to take an oath. We expect them to follow in with that. Well, we took this oath voluntarily. People sent us down here to follow this. So I would just ask you to think about those people, once we make it lawful and then regulate it and then tax it. I mean, where do we stop? Maybe we've gone too far already. I don't know. But I look at this and I think, for me personally, this is a line in the sand. I can't go this far. We've got families out there that I think we've heard from some of the earlier speakers on some of the amendments. People will lose their houses. Then we'll set up a fund to where we can help counsel people with addictions. But we kind of helped out on the addiction part of it, if you think about it. Just because we pass a law doesn't make it moral. And so I think it would behoove this body to think about those families that sent you down here. Think about those houses next door to you that, we heard some of the people say, well, I raised kids in this environment and they turned out fine. Well, this is okay. This isn't for you. But think about that family 3 houses down where there's already a propensity towards this kind of thing. And think about your oath to this Constitution and think, boy, maybe those extra dollars that we shove in there is not worth what it costs to our society. So I'm going to urge a no on this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Representative Burt, for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Looking into this one, I feel this legislation, to me anyway, is about the consistency and about respect. I came to Wyoming I came to Cheyenne because of the trust of the individuals that put me here and their families. Now, some folks may not make the right choices, but I believe the vast majority of the people in our state, they will make the right choices. We can argue what those right choices are. I mean, somebody's right choice in their life is not the same right choice as what is good for me. We have different lifestyles. We have the different right choices in our lives. So, I mean, that's something we have to look at. In an effort to prevent bad behavior, for the few that we're saying, that the addiction will take over and it'll spill over into the communities that we're going to have to take over. But able to prevent the bad behavior of a few, it's not our role as legislators to take the freedoms from everybody. I don't think that's our role here as legislators. When we unnecessarily strip the freedoms of everybody based upon the fact that something can happen. I mean, show me, I won't go down that road, I guess. We take away the economic liberty to us and to others, as the ability for them to use their own personal money and their own freedom and their choices in life. And we take away the way that they want to use that. The citizens of our state, we take away their choices of the way that they can spend their own money, the way that they come to work, what they work for, the things that they truly believe in. If someone wants to gamble on a sports game, why is that our choice to decide whether or not they can or can't do that? I don't see that's where it's our choice. Many of us ran on the commitment to freedom. I swore an oath to defend the freedoms, both as a military vet as well as in these chambers alone. I've taken a number of oaths in my life, and I don't take those oaths lightly. I carry them with me probably to the end of my days. If we claim the banner of freedom and liberty, we should be consistent on our vote for liberty, even when it crosses our own personal lines. Raise your families the way that you want to be raised. I believe that. Everybody has a choice to raise your family as you feel fit. My parents raised me to a certain standard, and I carry that with me today. But if I make choices as an adult to how that may alter down the path of the things that I've experienced in life, the places I've gone in life, then I get that choice as an adult to make that choice. But my parents still raised me to a certain level of value, and I appreciate that. I respect them for that. And I believe that everybody that has children, you raised your children to meet that level. But when they become adults, they have the ability to make the choices on if they continue that path or not. And if they don't continue that path, you don't banish them as children. they're still your children, but you just have to accept that they're going to move on and move a certain direction because they feel that the way that their life interactions will allow them to live their life as they feel free. We also must respect the rights of other families and make other different choices. I respect my colleagues and I understand their concerns. I also respect my constituents, those that do support me and those that don't support me, those that want to gamble and those that don't. They've earned their own money and they should be able to use it in the way that they see fit. I respect their ability to raise their family, and I see the same. I respect their choice in education, whichever way it goes. In the same way, I respect the choices on what kinds of food they eat or how they feed their families. This strikes at the core of freedom and liberty, in my personal opinion. I ask my colleagues to support this legislation as a sign for respect for Wyoming and the individuality of the liberty of our residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Ayer for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I doubt if there's anybody here that hasn't already made up their mind how they're going to vote on this issue. But if I was wavering at all, the first two speakers who spoke in favor of this amendment and against the bill, I think they gave some very persuasive arguments. I'm not going to take long, but I do want to just reiterate something that I mentioned yesterday. If you legalize something, you're going to get more of it. If it's illegal, you're going to have less of it. As an example of how that occurs, I doubt if there's anybody here who's not broken the speed limit. Driving from here to Bridger Valley, part of it is 80 miles an hour, part of it is 75 miles an hour, sometimes with the variable speed limit, some of it's even 65. And generally, conditions are pretty much the same where it's 80 as when it's 75 or 65. But I think we all, even though we may break the speed limit, we'll go slower when it's 65 or 75 than when the speed limit is 80. If we legalize online sports gaming, there's no doubt we're going to have more of it in our state. There will be some people who will do it just because it's legal now, and who would not do it if it was illegal. And for that reason, I think we should vote against the bill in favor of the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I speak on and for the bill. You know, in our oaths, which we all take very seriously, I'm sure, there's nothing in there that says that we're going to tell the guy next to us or the woman next to us what choice they should make. We can certainly offer advice. When I came back from the conflict over in the Far East, I was a nursing assistant at the VA, the hospital that takes care of veterans. And one of the things that you learn when you take care of people is you learn about relationships. And that's what we're talking about here, is we're talking about relationships with our neighbors, with our friends, our family, our coworkers. None of us want someone to go down the wrong path. And certainly we have a moral obligation to do what we can, when we can, for those folks who are in those unfortunate circumstances. And so, you know, what I think about when I cast my vote for this bill, I'm thinking about the greater good for Wyoming. What is the greater good here, right? And I think the greater good is what we can do with the funds that are going to be generated. And certainly we're going to look for taking care of the folks who may be impacted. But I'd urge that consideration. The other thing I would mention is, you know, we have a lot of folks, when I was at that hospital taking care of veterans, we had folks who got checks on a regular basis, and they would run right out and they would get inebriated and come back in, brought in by the police sometimes, and we'd have to take care of them. And their family would come in, and you'd see firsthand the effects and so forth. And that does take an effect on you. But you know what? The families in many cases came together for those family members to get them on the right path. And we in the community play a key role, I believe, as we're doing here, and trying to do the right thing for the right reason. It's for the right outcome. And I think here the right thing to do is to pass this bill. I urge your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Olson, for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am, well, one, I just really appreciate the discussion and in the debate. I think it's been very substantive. I think it's also been very, very philosophical. I'm against the amendment and for the bill. And I really appreciate the conversation about the Constitution. And I looked at the Constitution, I searched one word that's important to me. I think it's important to everyone in here. I know it's important to our constituents. The word is liberty. I searched it and it appears 7 times in our Constitution. I won't go through all 7, but one clause was very striking to me with this conversation. And it says absolute arbitrary power over the lives, liberty, and property of free men exists nowhere in a republic, not even in the largest majority. And as I read that and I think about the concept of absolute arbitrary power over the lives and liberty of the citizens of Wyoming, I think about the conversation we're having, whether it's moral, whether it's right, whether it will grow, whether it will shrink, and that somehow we derive from that we are sent here to regulate the lives of our citizens. I don't believe that. I believe in raising my family. I have 3 kids. They mean everything in the world to me, but I believe that I have that absolute power to raise my children. That authority rests with myself and with my spouse to ensure that my children are raised right. And the definition of what is right is not found in this body. It's not found in somebody else's home. It's found in mine. So I won't, and I never will probably trust and rely wholeheartedly on this body or any governmental body to pass the laws that I think are going to keep my family safe or raise my family in the right way. That's always going to be my responsibility. This bill doesn't change that. I don't believe so. If it did, if voting against this bill would prevent online sports betting, then why does it already exist in the state? It already exists. Why is it billions and billions of dollars passing in and out of legal and illegal jurisdictions all over the United States? Because laws don't restrain activity. They do sometimes, but they don't wholeheartedly. You vote against this bill, it's not going to change what's already happening. You vote for this bill, I'll agree with some of the speakers. Will some betting increase? Probably. Is the world going to change tomorrow because of that in Wyoming? I don't think so. It's already rampant enough. And to the extent that it concerns a family, I think that family should take the personal responsibility to raise their family as they see fit. I don't gamble. I don't gamble in any way. Don't touch the lottery. Never have. Never even think about it. I don't really care that much for sports. So I'm probably not going to bet on sports. But I'm not going to stand in the way of, number one, the liberty of my constituents to make that choice for themselves. More importantly, though, is what this bill actually does. This bill doesn't legalize online sports betting. It regulates online sports betting. And that's why I'm truly on and for the bill. It's already happening. So you have the opportunity to regulate it, to craft a framework around what works and doesn't work, to protect the citizens of Wyoming. Without telling them the choice that they can and can't make, but setting parameters that keep consumers safe. And then the last little piece of it is that revenue piece. Sure, there's a revenue piece to Wyoming, but I think the revenue is honestly pretty insignificant for what we're asking for. To me, this is more about an opportunity to regulate something that's already happening in Wyoming. So as we think about our constitutional duty, I hope we'll think wholeheartedly about arbitrary power over the lives and liberty of our citizens. And I hope that we'll think about what that means to not be arbitrary. I think it means to regulate it and regulate it right. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Representative Nyman, for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll keep this short. I mean, we've discussed this probably pretty thoroughly, but as I've listened and I've sat and I don't go to the podium a great lot, try to spend a lot of time up here, taking up time and stopping what we're trying to do here, but it still just amazes me. I mean, if you want to outlaw gambling, then I guess you'd have to outlaw what I do. I ranch for a living. I mean, I am the epitome of taking risk and putting it out there and running the real risk of losing everything that I have every year. Whether it be storm, it's a lot of the stuff I do too is completely outside of the scope of what I can control. Hailstorm come through, a big white combine comes through and cleans up my wheat crop. If I'm not insured, I'm done. And that's gambling. That's taking risk every day. But I will add a caveat to that for all of you, and that's my perspective on this. I don't come to you and ask you to help with my loss. I don't take government subsidies personally. If I take that beating, that was my choice to plant that crop. It was my choice to be in that, and it was my choice, and I was going to live with the consequences. And when we discuss here as a body that this is a personal choice and that we are responsible for that and nobody should limit those. No, nobody tells me I can't ranch. Nobody does. They're glad. A lot of guys, I mean, don't badmouth a farmer on a full stomach. But the reality of it is that this is not, like many issues we're going to face, a situation where it is isolated to just us and it only affects me. We're talking about the fact that the folks, whenever they deal with this, and the good representative from, I believe, District 33 said it. I mean, she laid out the best argument I ever heard. As she saw it develop, she got to see firsthand the problems that go with this type of decision-making. And this isn't isolated. But the truth is, it does affect me. It has an impact. If I get hailed out, I'm not going to go to the good representative who's staring at me in the front and ask him to contribute to my cause or to feed my kids. I'm going to have to come up with something to do that. But a lot of times in these situations, we're deciding this legislation and saying, well, this is okay, you can do this, do whatever you want. We're saying that that's your problem. You work this out. We'll let you do this. But society, folks, is not built that way. My goodness, people, there's a safety net for flipping everything in this world. You can't pay your electric bill? I help you pay your electric bill. If your kids don't eat, I will help you with the school lunch program. And they don't care whether or not I've had my crop hailed out. I still got to come up with the money because if I don't pay my property taxes, they take my place. So just consider while we're making these allowances and these freedoms that we enjoy, freedom's not free. We bear a responsibility. And if you want to do this, then do like I said before, exempt us of the responsibility of cleaning up for and making up for your bad decision-making. That's okay. I'm not going to begrudge you the opportunity to go and do whatever you want. But please, do not take away my choices, because money is choices. Take away my money from my kids and my grandkids and my ability to go on, because everything's legal. Everybody's doing it. Why aren't we doing it? Here's yet another opportunity to make money. Well, that's fine. Make your money. But leave me out of it. And bear the responsibility for the actions that you take. And don't dump it off on the rest of the taxpayers. There's a $300,000 deal in there that hopefully will be funded by the proceeds from this, that'll offset the expense to counties and towns and districts to have to pay for the treatment of folks that struggle with this. A perfect example of the fallacy of this type of thinking. We're going to create another safety net for you. And thankfully, I guess we'll be using some of your money that you should have been spending maybe more wisely to get you out of the mess on and against the bill.
Representative Clifford, waiting patiently. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues of the 66th, I just come before you and I'm going to take a little perspective, and I need to lay out the background when I saw this bill. I thought everybody was at the table. We talk about respect, and I represent two sovereign tribes, Northern Arapaho, of which I'm a member, and the Eastern Shoshone, two. I thought everybody was brought to the table. Just my tribe was brought to the table, not the Eastern Shoshone. And I think we do a disrespect when we didn't bring them to the table, didn't bring them into the discussions, because this affects them as well. And so I would just urge us to vote no on this bill today. And I would urge, I'm willing to work with the bringer so that everybody's to the table and we could work on a bill during the interim that best suits all the key stakeholders here, state of Wyoming and the 2 sovereign tribes. And I'm willing to do that with the bringer of the bill. I am. And so, but here I rise in support of in opposition to the bill. I can't do a disrespect to my Eastern Shoshone tribe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Representative Hallinan, for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in favor of the amendment and opposed to the bill. I do that with some trepidation because my dad was a big $2 bettor, and he made some big money gambling. But this here puts gambling into the home, and I think that's going too far. I think that this is an issue where there are differences of opinion based on libertarian points of view, which I have share some, but not totally. I think that the legislature has the necessity to try to choose things that are for the people. And one of those things is what is best for the people. And it's not good to have gambling in the home. I think that is a very vital point in this issue. So for that reason, I oppose this bill and favor the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative Hallinan. Members, let's just be cautious to not use name political parties, even though we may be talking conceptually. Let's just be cautious of that, please. Thank you. Representative Romero Martinez, for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, last week on Friday, I pretty much blew a gasket on this issue. And I apologize to the bringer, but I wanted to give a little bit of explanation in terms of translation and making comments. In Spanish, there's 2 forms of the word you. I'm sure everybody knows that. There's tú and there's su. So if I say you, sometimes I really don't intend, and the good whip from the right side of the aisle understood that immediately. So there's only one word in English, and it's you, and sometimes it comes off really direct. I don't know everybody here, so I should probably, if I was speaking Spanish, use the word su. But since I speak English pretty well, I'll be using one maybe at this point. I helped to bring an amendment with the worthy representative representing the 2 sovereign tribes. And I do agree that not all stakeholders were brought to the table. So I do have some concerns in that regard, and I also would support an interim topic as a resolution to working forward. It is going on. It's just not regulated. There's some good points there. So I think just a better conversation or a more complete conversation. I'm probably the biggest gamer here, just not per se gambling, but we have missed a lot of boats through space and time. in regards to the conversation regarding freedom, I had a friend tell me, we have the Statue of Liberty on the East Coast. It would probably behoove us in the great country that we're in to maybe build a statue of responsibility on the West Coast. People should be asking, are we considering this now because we're broke? Because it feels like we're doing it so we can capitalize on the poor choices of others. Undecided on the amendment and against the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any member for their first time, any additional member for their first time on House Bill 133? Any member for their first time? Any member for their second time? Second time. Second time before the sponsor. To the sponsor, Representative Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you, members. That's what we'd like to do, is be able to debate this issue. This is kind of an emotional issue. And so I appreciate the time and effort put into comments. I want you to know that I am very sensitive to individual rights. Absolutely. But I need to point out to you that our green books are full of laws that protect our society. We can't steal. We can't beat someone up, even if it's for fun. We can't travel fast in our cars. We have to put our children in car seats. We have a lot, and that's what a civilized society does. They establish rules within the communities to regulate so that people don't hurt each other. I think the greater good is to defeat this bill. Members, we quite often use the phrase vote your conscience. And sometimes that really doesn't apply because it's not a conscious issue at all, but I think this one is. So in closing, I implore you to vote your conscience, and I hope that'll be a no vote on the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I respectfully withdraw the amendment.
Thank you. House Bill 133, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Andrew. Baker. Banks. Bear. Blackburn. Brown. Burkhart. Burt. Clausen. Clifford. Connolly. Crago. Duncan. Eklund. Air. Flitner. Fortner. Gray. Greer. Hallinan. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Hunt. Jennings. Kenner.
Aye.
Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson Dan. McGuire. Martinez. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Oakley. Obermuller. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Paxton. Provenza. Roscoe. Schwartz. Sherwood. Simpson. Summers. Stith. Stivar. Sweeney. Walters. Washut. Western. Wharf. Williams. Wilson. Winter. Yin. Zwanitzer. Mr. Speaker. Closing vote. Are there any changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 28 aye, 32 no.
House Bill 133, having failed to receive the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Bill 133 has failed to pass the House. All right, members, we do have, our next order of business is to continue with Committee of the Whole on the budget, but we are at a point where I don't know that it's worth coming into Committee of the Whole to continue that. Let's do that. Let's do that. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I move the House stand in recess until 1:45. So that'll be 2 hours.
Committee announcements. Chairman Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your committee number 8, Transportation, will meet whenever we all get down to East 3 to consider 3 bills, House Bill 179, House Bill 190, House Bill 241.
Thank you. Chairman Flitner.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Your committee number 6, Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources, will meet at noon in 15 minutes to work House Bill 115 and House Bill 156.
Thank you. Chairman Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your committee number 1, Judiciary, will meet immediately upon adjournment to consider 2 bills, House Bill 213, Disclosure of Peace Officer Recordings, and House Bill 236, Firearms Transactions, Financial Discriminations, in the East 01 room. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other
Mr. Speaker,
announcements? Oh,
sorry.
Please
Can I-
continue.
I just wanted to correct I meant upon recess.
Noon recess today.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Any other announcements? Any other announcements? Chairman Nicholas.
That's 125. At noon. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your House Appropriations will do House Bill 125, 10 minutes after noon recess tomorrow.
House Bill 125, was that, Mr. Chairman? Thank you. Any other announcements? Any other announcements? So members, I want to remind you that today is the 5 o'clock today is the deadline for turning in your budget amendments. And you have until two hours prior to convening tomorrow to have them approved. Now, if we have folks that do this in a timely manner, i.e. both things, because that's it, our intention is to have printed copies of the amendments. So please, the sooner you turn your amendments in and approve them, or withdraw them if you do not want them to be considered, the more likely that your amendment will be included in a printed packet for tomorrow. Now, the chief clerk will do our best to accommodate this, but it takes our participation as well. So please turn them in and approve them as soon as you can. Second reading amendments for tomorrow. Second reading amendments tonight at 5, tomorrow 2 hours prior. We hope to have printed copies. Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also want to add House Bill 198 for noon recess tomorrow on House Appropriations.
All right. Any further announcements? Any further announcements? The House is in recess until 1:45. Thank you.